Welcome to Unit 13 of the TESOL course at Southern Utah University. This lesson planning video will focus on the concept of classroom management. We'll talk about good lesson planning and how that affects classroom management. We'll also talk about the classroom environment, teacher-student rapport, use of students' first language in the classroom, and the importance of routines. Some people may wonder, if this is a video focusing on classroom management, why are we talking about lesson planning? But the fact is, the majority of classroom management issues can be traced back to poor lesson planning. The better the lesson planning, the fewer classroom management issues there are. If teachers can design good lessons, most classroom management problems disappear. So what do we mean when we talk about good lessons? Well, one, we need to ensure that there's a logical sequence of activities in the lesson. That it makes sense that students are doing this and then doing this, that they have the information they need to complete the next task, that a teacher has broken down a complex task into enough steps that students can understand what they need to do, that it's clear, it's scaffolded well, and that it's at level, that we're not asking students to do something it's too easy or too difficult for them. That's when problems start occurring. Once we have that good lesson, we need to make sure that we know how to transition smoothly and quickly between activities in the lesson. If we go to move on to an activity and we realize we don't have the materials, or we don't know how we're going to get students organized into groups and we haven't thought about that ahead of time, then we're going to run into these problems where the lesson breaks down, students start getting distracted, and that's when, again, when classroom problems classroom management issues can arise. One thing to keep in mind, if you're going to have students do some kind of practice, especially in group, provide the instructions before students get into groups, because once you have students get into groups, they're not going to listen anymore, and you're going to have to shout over them all. So just be thoughtful and clear about how the lesson is actually going to be implemented in the classroom. Do you have the things you need? Have you set students up properly for each stage of the lesson? If you do those things, that eliminates the majority of classroom management problems. Some other classroom management problems can arise from the classroom environment. Make sure that the classroom is a comfortable temperature, not too cold, not too hot. Now, sometimes you teach at a school where it's cold. I've taught at schools where there's no electricity. All the students wear warm winter coats during the winter, and the teacher needs to be prepared for that too. Okay, but do your best with what you have, and if you can make it more comfortable for students, take those steps. Also think about acoustics. Is the classroom, can students hear you? Can they hear each other? Is there interfering noise? Is there things you can do to work with administration or other teachers to make sure that students in your classroom can hear you and hear their peers effectively? Think about the seating of the classroom. If you're doing lots of group work, having chairs that are bolted to the ground are not ideal. Now you can certainly do things to manage this. Maybe students get into groups and they stand together. But see what you can do with your classroom seating arrangements to make the most of it so that it's ideal for when students need to listen to you during a presentation part of the lesson, but also during a practice lesson where they have the comfort to do what they need to do. Also, think about technology. Do you have the right technology for your classroom? Can students see? Is there enough light in the classroom? Have you tested out the technology ahead of time? I mean, we've all been in classes where the teacher thought the technology would work and then tries to use it and it doesn't. And if you don't have a backup for what you're going to do, then you start to lose the classroom again, and you have classroom management problems. So always come to class with a backup anytime you're going to rely on technology. Think about what you and the students can do that will still be meaningful and helpful if the technology does not work. Think about other materials. If you have handouts that you're going to need in the class, make sure that they've been copied in advance. Don't wait until the last moment. Sometimes a copier doesn't work. Think about, again, about backups. But also make sure that there's no distractions in the classroom that will keep students from focusing on the learning. Think about what's on the walls of the classroom. Are these things that are helping students, or are they things that are hindering students and could cause classroom management issues? Another thing to help with classroom management is develop good teacher-student rapport. And rapport here, what we're talking about is the relationship or the connection between students and teachers. Do students feel good about their relationship with the teacher? Is the teacher friendly but also professional? It's important here to have consistent expectations. Okay? Not be really lenient sometimes and then really tough other times. That will confuse students. Be a consistent kind of personality, someone that they can trust, but someone that they know is an expert and wants to help them develop their language. If you don't care about the students and they don't know that you care about them, they're not really going to be interested in what you have to teach them. So you need to make sure you establish a good relationship with them. Get to know them and what they care about, and find ways to connect what they care about with what are with the outcomes of the course, and bring those kinds of things together. Then you'll develop a relationship where students won't want to act out so much in the class because they'll respect you and they want you to be successful. Now, this is an issue that not all teachers would agree with, but the more and more I read about bilingualism and the multilingual learner, the more that I push back against some traditional notions that you should never use students' first language, and that students should never be allowed to use their first language in the language learning classroom. The truth is, it's not realistic and it's not helpful for students. Now, I would certainly say that when you have a mixed language classroom, like teaching in the United States, where you may have students from 5 or 6 different language backgrounds, it's not really practical to have learned all of their native languages. And so if you favor one of their languages in the classroom and not the language of the other students, that may make students uncomfortable. But when you're teaching overseas and you have a homogeneous student group, they all come from the same L1 or first language background, sometimes using a little bit of their first language, one, can improve rapport with the students. It lets them know that you care about their culture and their language just as much as you do about English. But it can also help quickly clarify issues that may come up with expectations or instructions for a lesson. Don't be afraid to use a student's L1 if it's appropriate for the context. It can help resolve lots of classroom management problems. The other important thing to keep in mind with classroom management is use routines. Find some activities and weekly schedules that you can use so that students know what to expect when they come to the classroom. They know, hey, every Tuesday morning we do this. Every Friday is a day where we do this kind of activity. The nice thing is this helps build student confidence that they know what to expect. They know what to do when they get to the classroom. As a substitute teacher for different classes, it's always nice to go into a class and know that students know what they're doing. I don't have to teach the lesson to the students. They know the routine. I'm just there to provide some oversight, to maybe clarify in the presentation part. When it comes to practice, students understand the process that they're supposed to go through, and they're just doing this same familiar process with new language input. It's always a treat to do that when you're a substitute, but it also gives me confidence that the learners in that classroom are becoming more teacher independent. And they're going to be better language learners because that teacher is training them how to use language on their own without always depending on the teacher for instructions. So routines are great. They help make a classroom organized and predictable. Too much routine gets boring, but in general, as long as there's new language content, you can use similar activities frequently, and students generally like that. So in this video, we talked about how good lesson planning, classroom environment, rapport, L1 use, and routines are all ways that we can use to minimize classroom management problems and create a classroom environment where students feel safe and confident.